Welcome back to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 422. I'm the host, Kyle Anzalone. I got a lot to talk about on today's show, so I want to get right into it. Just want to take a quick second to thank everybody who donated to the fundraiser at antiwar.com. We hit our fundraising goal, so that is a huge help. And of course, we always repost the show on the blog at antiwar.com. The show is hosted at the Libertarian Institute, where I'm the news editor. So be sure to check out everything we got going on at the Institute. And then you can always find the show video version on YouTube, Rumble, and Odysee. And then it's up everywhere you can listen to podcasts. Let's get into it. First article today by our good friend Will Porter. Up to 4.5 million dead in post 9/11 war zones. Will writes, the far-reaching effects of America's war on terror may have contributed to the deaths of some 4.5 million people, according to new research by Brown University's Cost of War Project. While many of the fatalities were a direct result of violent conflict, indirect causes such as economic collapse and food insecurity have taken a far greater toll. Published on Monday, the study examines long-term impact of the post-9/11 wars and devastating indirect toll inflicted on Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Syria, Yemen, Libya, and Somalia, all nations subject to U.S. military intervention since 2001. And here's something, that's kind of interesting when you look at it. If we're talking about economic devastation and things like that, we're not considering deaths in, say, Africa outside of Libya and Somalia, where there has been a lot of U.S. intervention, and certainly the war in Libya and the instability it created in the Sahel has contributed to a number of deaths. And then if you would look in the Middle East, as say Lebanon, where there's been a lot of economic hardship that is at least in part due to the U.S. war in Syria. You have the situation in Palestine, of course, where the U.S. contributes in big ways to what Israel is doing there, although I could see how that's a little bit different from a post 9/11 terror war, because that's been going on as well. But, we are kind of looking at a isolated, in geographical area here, and probably not understanding the full impacts of the post 9/11 terror wars and what they have done in the region. So some of these people are killed in fighting, but far more, especially children, have been killed by reverberating effects of war, such as the spread of disease. The paper said these latter indirect deaths, estimated at 3.6 to 3.7 million, and resulted in health problems, have resulted from post 9/11 wars, destruction of economies, public services, and the environment. Though the researchers acknowledged that the true figure remains unknown, the study revealed a wide range of factors contributing to mortality. Those include economic collapse and the resultant loss of livelihood for local residents, the destruction of health infrastructure and public services, environmental contamination, as well as other cultural effects from the war that could lead to further violence down the line. While the research does not ascribe blame to any single warring party or factor, and neither does it suggest that the full death count is quantifiable, a reasonable and conservative estimate suggests that at least 4.5 million people have died in the major post 9/11 war zones, this study concludes. And so it does, say it's only talking about the major war zones. I just want people to understand that the scope may even be bigger than this. It went on to stress that body counts are complicated and controversial, and that tallying deaths from indirect causes is even more difficult, suggesting its figures are merely a tentative estimate based on a variety of sources. The researchers found staggering levels of child malnutrition in some of the affected countries, with Afghanistan and Yemen topping the list. In the wake of Washington's 2-decade military occupation, more than 3 million Afghan children are now experiencing wasting, and that is a severe symptom and potentially life-threatening condition or stage of malnutrition. Last year, Doctors Without Borders worried of an increasing case warned of a worrying increase in Afghanistan's malnutrition rates, citing the suspension of international aid as among the primary causes. A special representative for the United Nations, Dr. Ramir Bravlov described the situation as almost inconceivable, adding up to 95% of Afghans were not eating enough food, with that percentage rising to almost 100% for female-headed households. And of course, there's an awful lot of those in Afghanistan because of all the men that the United States spent 20 years killing. The United Nations Emergency Aid Coordinator Martin Griffiths has also attributed the crisis in Afghanistan in part to international sanctions and the seizure of government bank accounts following the Taliban's sudden rise to power in the summer of 2021. The study found that more than 2 million children in Yemen were also suffering from wasting following the 8 years of brutal Saudi bombings, and its allies also contributed to that, which includes the US, UK, UAE, which have all but crippled the country's healthcare sector. Riyadh has received indispensable support from the United States throughout the conflict, despite countless reports of attacks on civilians and infrastructure, including hospitals and clinics, homes, factories, farms, and bridges. A UN estimate in 2021 suggested that some 377,000 people have been killed in Yemen since the war erupted in 2015, with 70% thought to be children under the age of 5. The Cost of War author said that the study aimed to convey the scale of suffering in war-torn nations, stating that the urgent need to mitigate the damage inflicted by U.S. military interventions and their long-term and indirect consequences. They added that the additional research is needed on the subject, voicing hopes that such work could prevent future loss of lives, as America's post-9/11 wars are ongoing missions for millions around the world who are living and dying from their effects. And so, you know, when we do look at this number, and this is a major respected group putting it out, 4.5 million is just so many people that, you know, you really have to wonder as an American, like, if maybe we could start to talk to our fellow citizens about this and say, hey, we can't replicate this, right? 4.5 million people dead, a lot of them children, because of our wars, is just intolerable. We can't allow this to go on. It's simply not worth it. And, you know, that might be a powerful argument for some people. I mean, these are just massive, disgusting numbers. Okay. Let's move on here, talk about the war in Ukraine, the U.S. relationship with Russia. I wrote this article for the Institute on May 15th. G7 to adopt highly symbolic ban on Russian oil imports as U.S. lacks support for an embargo. The leaders of the group of 7 will adopt a prohibition on restarting oil imports from Russia, according to the Financial Times. The highly symbolic ban falls well short of the total export embargo proposed by Washington. President Joe Biden will meet with other G7 leaders. That includes Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, the UK, the US, and the European Union this week in Japan. Now, he was supposed to be, going to other places, and I think I will talk about that more later in the show, but Biden, I believe, is still planning to travel to Japan for the G7 summit. In the run-up to the summit, American officials lobbied the bloc to agree to an embargo on Russia. A draft of the statement that will be signed at the summit adopts only a highly symbolic ban on resuming imports from Russian oil sources that the Kremlin shut down. And so, from my understanding, this would just be like if the Kremlin had, say, a pipeline that was going from Russia into Poland, and because Poland did something, Russia shut off that pipeline, then Poland could not start importing again through that pipeline. And so that's why it's highly symbolic, because as FT reported, that one official told the outlet the move was meant to make sure that partners don't change their mind in a hypothetical future. So this isn't even a scenario that they're really necessarily worried about. It's just something that could happen. Since they're getting all the world leaders together, they need something to sign that sounds like something meaningful. And so this is what they came up with. Well, Washington sought a ban on a total ban on exports from Russia by the G7. Financial Times reported 2 weeks ago that Japan and the EU view the embargo as simply not doable. Separately, a German official recently dismissed the American proposal. The sometimes discussed approach of we ban everything first and allow exemptions will not work in our view, the unnamed official said. We want to be very, very precise, and we want to avoid unintended side effects. And so, interesting that, Biden is still going to Japan, even though he's not going to get what he wants there. All right, let's move on. This is really important. Dave DeCamp wrote this up yesterday for antiwar.com. African leaders to present peace plan to Putin and Zelensky. All right, so the South African president said on Tuesday that the Russian president and Ukrainian president have agreed to host a delegation of African leaders to discuss a potential peace plan for the conflict in Ukraine. The South African president said, my discussion with the two leaders demonstrate that they are both ready to receive African leaders and to have discussion on how this conflict can be brought to an end. Whether that will succeed or not is going to depend on the discussions that will be held. On top of the South African leader, the leaders of Senegal, Uganda, Egypt, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Zambia also support the plan. The South African president did not give a timeline on when the visits to Moscow and Kiev will happen. So this seems like fantastic news to me, of a party that's probably most interested in simply ending this war. Africa ranks along with China and Brazil as being a part of that group. And so maybe, all together a little bit, that this peace plan could start to develop. Maybe the African leaders will have an impartial nature that is able to help foster the diplomacy, where China could put some weight maybe on one side here. And of course, they have a pretty large economy, a lot of economic leverage. And so, there's a lot that could happen if these African leaders are able to talk to both and start to put together some kind of deal. Now, at the same time, I don't know if it's going to happen. I think the view in Washington and also in Kiev is that they want to retake all of Ukraine's territory, that even if this coming ceasefire or counteroffensive that Ukraine has been planning is successful, I don't know that Kiev and Washington will still be willing to sit down and talk with Moscow. And the Kremlin, from their perspective, a lot of the rhetoric over the past several months has been around, at this point we see this war as having a military solution and they're going to continue to take territory. And as the West is giving Ukraine weapons with longer ranges, if Russia's past statements are any indication, that means that they are actually going to try to take more of Ukraine in the coming months and not less. So we also have China trying to look at fostering some peace talks here. A high-level Chinese envoy is set to begin a trip that will bring him to Russia, Ukraine, and several other European countries. Beijing hopes to broker a ceasefire to bring an end to the fight in Ukraine. Now, this is something the U.S. is explicitly against. They have said that they do not want a ceasefire in Ukraine because they think it will cement the Russian gains in the country. Now, there is probably some truth to that, but at the same time, you could look at it from the other perspective, is that, it will end the Ukrainian losses where they are. And that may not be ideal from Kiev's perspective, but it may be the best solution on the table when you look out 6 months or a year. If Russia really is just going to chew away at Ukraine and take more and more territory slowly in these long and bloody battles, then maybe it's better for Ukraine to end the bleeding now, lose less of their citizens, because the more territory that Russia takes, the less leverage Kiev will have, and the more citizens they lose in a war of attrition. It looks like Russia might have the edge here. So let's move on from talks now and talk about what Europe is in the West are really doing. Germany announces $2.9 billion arms package for Ukraine. This from Dave DeCamp on May 14th. Germany on Saturday announced its largest package of military aid for Kiev worth $2.95 billion, Berlin's largest since Russia invaded Ukraine last year. According to Defense Post, the massive arms package includes 30 Leopard 1 tanks, Marder fighting vehicles, air defense systems, and surveillance drones. The announcement came a day before Ukrainian President Zelensky visited Berlin. I thank Germany for the largest military aid package since the beginning of this full-scale war. Full-scale Russian invasion, Zelensky wrote on Twitter. A German air defense systems, artillery, and tanks and infantry fighting vehicles are saving Ukrainian lives and bringing us closer to victory. Although I really haven't seen anything to suggest that Ukraine is getting any closer to victory. Meeting with Zelensky in Berlin, Chancellor of Germany Olaf Scholz said Berlin will support Ukraine for as long as is necessary. And this is something that we've heard over and over from the West. And while in a way it kind of sounds meaningless, right? Like, we'll support you for as long as necessary, probably isn't the truth, because at some point, your own other interests may start to override Kiev's interest, in which case, hopefully Berlin starts making choices that are better for the German people and not for the Ukrainian people over the Germans. But at the same time, I do think that the leaders who have reiterated this over and over again now do feel committed to this. And so they just continue to pour more and more weapons into Ukraine. Zelensky visits UK. Sunak promises more military support. Ukrainian President Zelensky visited Britain on Monday and secured a pledge for more weapons and military equipment from London, including air defense missiles and long-range attack drones. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak also expressed support for giving Ukraine Western-made fighter jets. And so we've had Zelensky visit, I know in recent days, Germany, France, and the UK, meeting with the leaders of each of these countries. My guess is that fighter jets was very high on the list of what Ukraine is asking for, because not only do we have Sunak expressing support for giving Ukraine Western-made fighter jets, but my understanding is France is also now looking at training Ukrainian pilots on Western-made fighter jets. And so this seems very problematic. We had the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov saying Britain aspires to be at the forefront among countries that continue to pump weapons into Ukraine. We repeat once again, it cannot yield any drastic and fundamental influence on the way the special military operation in Ukraine is unfolding, but definitely it leads to further destruction, further action, and it makes the whole story of Ukraine much more complicated, Peskov added. So we just have more weapons being pumped into Ukraine. Now Russia hit a US-made Patriot air defense system in Kiev. Russia's military said on Tuesday, and I did see some videos alleging to confirm this, that it hit a U.S.-made Patriot air defense system in the Ukrainian capital of Kiev with a hypersonic missile, which was later confirmed by a U.S. official. A high-precision strike by a hypersonic missile hit a U.S. Patriot-made air defense system, said Russian Defense Ministry spokesperson Lieutenant General Igor Konashkov. A U.S. official told CNN that a Patriot system in Kiev was likely damaged but not destroyed by the Russian missile barrage. The U.S. is assessing the damage to see if the system needs to be taken out of Ukraine for repairs. And this is, one of the very interesting things where in this war, the West has all these kind of bases and facilities set up along the border between Poland and Ukraine, and they constantly are moving weapons in and out and repairing them in Poland and then deploying them back to the battlefield. It really makes Poland, more of a party to this war, and very concerning. Now, a couple interesting stories here that have to deal with the leaks. the Teixeira leads, the Discord leads. Zelensky privately plotted bold attacks on Russian territory. This is big. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has privately plotted major attacks inside Ukraine while pledging publicly that his forces won't use Western provided arms to target Russian territory, the Washington Post reported on Saturday. The report cited leaked documents that are part of the Discord leaks and said that Zelensky has previously suggested attempting to occupy Russian villages and bomb a Russian pipeline to Hungary, and had expressed concern over the lack of long-range weapons that can strike Russian territory. According to one document, Zelensky suggested during a meeting in January that Ukrainian forces could conduct strikes in Russia and move forces into Russian territory to occupy unspecified Russian border cities. The idea of the assault would be to give Kiev leverage in talks with Moscow. Another document, which has previously been reported on, said in February Zelensky expressed concern to Ukraine's commander-in-chief that Ukraine does not have longer-range missiles capable of reaching Russian troop deployments in Russia, nor anything with which to attack them. Zelensky's most provocative suggestion came during a meeting with the deputy prime minister in February, where he proposed blowing up a pipeline which provides oil to Hungary, a NATO member. The document said that Zelensky highlighted that Ukraine should just blow up the pipeline and destroy likely Hungarian Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's industry, which is heavily based on Russian oil. The document suggested Zelensky was expressing rage towards Hungary and therefore could be making hyperbolic and meaningless threats, but either way, the revelation is sure to raise tensions between Kiev and Budapest. Both U.S. and Ukrainian officials have been enraged with Hungary over its calls for a ceasefire and efforts to ease U.S. sanctions on Russia. Hungary and other landlocked former European nations that rely on pipelines are giving exemptions from the EU on the Russian oil ban. The revelations came after the UK started delivering Storm Shadow missiles to Ukraine, which have a range of about 155 miles, significantly further than the munitions the US has provided to Kiev so far. The US welcomed the British move and said despite the Discord leaks, it isn't concerned about any potential escalation, which is so disturbing because they should be very, very scared. Washington Post deletes portion of Zelensky interview where he accuses paper of aiding Russia, but then puts it back in after it becomes widely known, trending on Twitter. They, I guess, decided that taking it out was drawing more attentions to it than just leaving it in the first place. And so, they just added to the story and create a bigger story rather than what I think they wanted, which was to erase this from the record. But of course, the internet remembers. The Washington Post deleted a portion of an interview with Ukrainian President Zelensky where he accuses the paper of helping Russia by posting a question about information contained in a classified leak. The interview was conducted on May 1st and published on Saturday. An archived version of the interview shows a testy exchange between Zelensky and the Post, which was later deleted and then restored. The Post asked Zelensky about documents they obtained that showed that members of Ukraine's main intelligence directorate of intelligence, known as the HUR, had a bad channel contact with the head of the Russian mercenary force Wagner Group. Zelensky appeared to think the Post received the information from Ukraine and demanded the paper reveal its source. I would also like to ask you a question. With which source from Ukraine do you have contact? Who is talking about the activities of our intelligence? Because this is the most severe felony in our country. Which Ukrainians are you talking to? He said. The Post informed Zelensky that the information did not come from Ukraine and were a part of the Discord leaks, which revealed information that was obtained by U.S. spying on Zelensky. And so I think there's something else that's interesting here. Either Zelensky isn't that familiar with the Discord leaks and some of the more provocative things in there, or the maybe just isn't keeping up to it. I don't know. It's just interesting. He's not more familiar with it and why that is. The Post said the documents showed that Karliro Bunavov, the head of Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence, informed Zelensky about the Russian plan to destabilize Moldova with former Wagner associates. The Post added that the head of Ukraine's main intelligence directorate informed you that you have viewed the Russian scheme as a way to incriminate Prizin because we have dealings with him. You instructed the head of your intelligence to inform Moldovan President Maia Sandu that the Budanov told you that the HUR had informed the head of the Wagner Group that he would be labeled a traitor who has been working with Ukraine. The documents say that the head of the Ukrainian intelligence directorate expected and Russians to use details of the head of the Wagner Group schemes, secret talks with the HUR and meetings with the HUR officers in Africa. So I know that was pretty jumbled. I honestly, I guess what they're saying is that, you know, we got this information. So they're saying that the head of Ukraine's main Directorate of Intelligence said something to the Moldovan president about his talks with the head of the Wagner Group, and that's how they know about all of this. I don't know. This part of the Discord lead seems weird, but Zelensky responded by asking the paper if it wanted to help Russia. You are releasing some sort of information that does not help our state to attack, and it does not help us to defend our state. So I don't quite understand what you are talking about. I don't quite understand your goal. Is it to help Russia? He said. When the Post responded by saying that it didn't want to help Russia, Zelensky replied that what's different. And this is unfortunate that the Post didn't say, you know, our job is to report the news, not to help one side or the other. But of course, you know, that's not how they respond. Now, there is, so the Wagner chief, Prizin, he is the head of the Wagner Group, and this is the group that's been fighting for Russia in the Bakhmut area, and he denies claims that he offered Ukraine Russian troop positions. He called it laughable. This is gaining a lot of attention in the media, so I just want to say that he denied it. It doesn't seem serious to me, and my guess is that this guy is close enough to Putin that if he was doing things like this, he would be dead. And we'll see what happens in the coming days. Maybe he's a dead man walking and the Russians kill him or something like that. In which case, maybe some of this information is true and that's why they took him out. But at the same time, it just doesn't seem right to me. Next up, CIA publishes video telling Russians to contact them. So this is how they're trying to recruit Russians. On Monday, the CIA published a video on YouTube and Telegram urging Russians to contact the agency in an effort to recruit intelligence assets inside of Russia. The text at the end of the short video says, "Contact us. Perhaps the people around you don't want to hear the truth. We want to." The video closes with a link to contact the CIA via secure servers using Tor, a web browser that encrypts user activity. The CIA has a site on the dark web that it uses to gather information from people around the world. The agency has tried to recruit Russians throughout the war, asking them to take a huge risk by providing information via the dark web. We are providing Russian language instructions on how to safely contact the CIA via our dark web site or reputable VPN for those who feel compelled to reach us because of the Russian government's unjust war, a CIA official told CBS News in May of 2012. Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, was asked about the CIA video and said it's likely Russia's intelligence service were looking into the matter. I am convinced that our special services are monitoring this space in the necessary way, he said. Peskov added, "We all know perfectly well that the CIA and other Western intelligence sources are not reducing their activity on the territory of our country. So, Russia says they're not very concerned about this. And my guess is it's kind of like the, saying that the head of the Wagner group was giving away positions of Russian soldiers. It just doesn't seem like something that's going to happen. All right, next up, Ukraine aid funding expected to run out by midsummer. The last massive aid package by Congress authorized for Ukraine has about $6 billion left, which is supposed to be expected to be used up by midsummer. So this is going to make it about 2 months further than I initially thought. I thought April, probably May. That initial $48 billion, that not initial, but the $48 billion that Congress approved for Ukraine in December would run out about then, but it looks like it's going to make it a little bit longer. Now, it may be that the White House has found other ways to send Kiev money, and so I haven't had to spend at quite the rate that I had thought. A senior Biden administration official told Politico that the White House is discussing a new package and is going to time it so the weapons can keep flowing to Ukraine. The official said the administration is fully committed to supporting Kiev in the war for the long haul. The Politico report said that a massive aid package for Ukraine might not be as easy to ram through Congress as they were, citing debate over the debt ceiling and dissent from a small but significant group of Republicans. But the majority of Republicans support arming Ukraine, including GOP leadership, who have been critical of President Joe Biden for not sending longer-range weapons and fighter jets. And so the debate will be interesting because I think there's going to be things that are said in the debate that we really like on our side. And I think there's going to be things said in the debate that we really abhor, like we need to send fighter jets to Ukraine. This article by Connor Freeman, May 16th at the Libertarian Institute. Ukraine has officially joined NATO's Cyber Defense Center. Kiev has officially joined the North Atlantic Treaty Organization Cyber Defense Center on Tuesday. Ukraine's flag was raised at the headquarters of NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence, CCDCOE, in Tallinn, according to a Ukrainian Foreign Ministry statement. Ukraine applied to join CCDCOE in 2021 and has been a contributing participant since March of 22. Today, the national flag of Ukraine is officially raised at the headquarters of the NATO Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence in Tallinn, marking the official ascension of Ukraine to CCDCOE, the ministry said on Twitter. Kiev further thanked members of the organization for the invitation and expressed special gratitude to the Estonian government for championing Ukraine's ascension. And so this is a way that Ukraine is becoming more and more entangled into NATO without becoming an official member of the alliance. We've talked a lot in the recent show about what's going to happen at the coming summit of NATO leaders in Lithuania. I believe that's going to happen in July. There's a lot of NATO members, especially these Eastern European countries, that really want NATO to give Ukraine concrete steps that it could take to join the alliance. And maybe this is part of the way that they are kind of buying off Kiev and the Eastern European governments by making Ukraine more a part of the alliance, but not giving it an official status yet. Now, one more thing to add here that Connor has in his article, and this is why I think this is a really important step. According to NATO, a cyber attack against any member of the alliance could trigger the blot's Article 5 Mutual Collective Defense Clause. In July 2021, President Joe Biden ominously warned that such cyber conflicts are liable to start a real war with Russia and China. If we end up in a war, a real shooting war with a major power, it's going to be as a consequence of a cyber breach of great consequence, Biden said while visiting the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. And so you could imagine here a situation where the U.S. and these other countries in the NATO cyber group are working with Ukraine on some kind of hack or something against Russia, and Russia retaliates against all these groups or all these countries, then what happens? Does NATO declare war against Russia? This is a way we could get drug into a world war here. Another article by Connor: Poland receives first HIMARS rocket launchers to deploy near Russian border. Warsaw received its first shipment of U.S.-made high-mobility artillery rocket systems, HIMARS, manufactured by Lockheed Martin, and announced plans to deploy them near the country's shared border with Russia's Kaliningrad enclave. In March, the Polish Defense Ministry announced these long-range multiple rocket launchers will have a range of nearly 200 miles and would be placed within 50 miles of the border with Kaliningrad. Russia's enclave is sandwiched between Lithuania and Poland, which is another NATO member state. So this is interesting because you had this little Russian enclave, and I guess they're giving Poland the ATACMS, the longer range, not just the HIMARS 50-mile rockets that they have given the Ukrainians, but the 200-mile range rockets. And so that's significant, and I'm not sure why they're doing this military buildup around Kaliningrad. It seems like an unnecessary provocation towards Russia when tensions are already so high. But that never stops NATO, so it looks like more escalations. This last article here today, I wrote this one for the Libertarian Institute. NATO conducts largest ever anti-submarine drills. The North Atlantic Treaty Organization conducted war games aimed at tracking and eliminating submarines. The 12-nation exercises were the largest ever for the alliance, simulating underwater warfare. Hosted by Iceland, the drills, dubbed Dynamic Mongoose, ran for 11 days and concluded early this month. 10 ships, several submarines, and 7 aircrafts from Canada, Denmark, France, Germany, Iceland, the Netherlands, Norway, Poland, Portugal, Spain, the UK, and the US participated. These exercises enable our allies and teams to sharpen their skills as well as work on new tactics, enhancing interoperability, coordination, and teamwork, said Commander of NATO Submarines, U.S. Rear Navy Admiral Stephen Mack. NATO has conducted the Dynamic Mongoose drills annually since 2012. This year, the war games occurred in the North Atlantic near the Faroe Islands. During the Joe Biden administration, the U.S. participated in several rounds of war games that increased tensions. In the Pacific, the U.S. held record-large military exercises with South Korea and the Philippines, leading to outrage in North Korea and China. In July, the U.S. and Australia will launch third largest ever war games, the Talisman Sabre war drills. Additionally, Seymour Hersh reported that the U.S. and other members of NATO used the Baltops 22 drills as a cover to plant explosives on the Nord Stream pipelines last summer, and of course that was detonated, destroying the pipelines last September. All right, everybody, thank you all so much for tuning in. I'll be back with more shows later in the week.